I'm Stephen Foskett.
I'm Chris Gundeman.
I'm Frederic van Haren.
And this is the Utilizing AI podcast. Welcome to another episode of Utilizing AI, the podcast for enterprise applications of machine learning, deep learning, and other artificial intelligence topics. This is the first episode of season 3. That's right, we have been recording Utilizing AI now. We're coming up on our 3rd year, and we start a new season when we basically have a new concept for the show. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today with the co-hosts here, Chris and Frederic. And, we're also going to take a look back at what we've looked at, what we've learned, what we've heard in season 2 of Utilizing AI. So before we start, I'll just point out that we do have all of these episodes online at utilizing-ai.com. And you can see a list of all of the season 2 episodes right there on the website. And actually, it's quite a few of them, 31 episodes that we recorded last year together. Chris, Frederic, what do you think about season 2? Name one episode that you think really kind of stands out in your mind. Let's start with Fred.
Yeah, I wouldn't say there's one particular. I think what I liked about season 2 is that it was across verticals, different verticals, right? We had some people that were talking about C executives, the C-suite. We had people talking about the developer ML community. So I don't have a particular preference, but I do like the spread, and I'm pretty sure that the community and the audience also likes to hear from different aspects from AI, certainly because there is still a lot of clouds over the definition of AI. And I think the more people understand what's happening across the board, the better they have an idea on what AI is all about.
How about you, Chris? What do you think was your a memorable episode?
Yeah, so again, I'm going to cheat a little bit as well and say that there's really kind of a trifecta of episodes that at least I had a lot of fun with, and that was kind of reverse chronological order, the one with Saiph Savage, and the one with Sofia Trejo, and the one with Ayodele Odubela, which all three were really interesting conversations that were a little bit less about enterprise technology and a little bit more about the implications of AI more broadly on our culture and our society. And while I do enjoy the episodes where we get deep in the weeds of technology, I also think it's really, really important at this point in the development of AI to have that kind of zoomed out view of what's really going on and what the possible implications are beyond just getting somebody's quarterly revenues higher.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, I have to agree that the ones that really stood out in my mind, when I was thinking of this last season, were the ones that challenged me to think about things in a new way or think about something I haven't even considered. And so that way, I'm going to call out Sofia Trejo. She gave me so much to think about that I wish we could have had an hour to talk to her about it. And just as a reminder, her point was essentially the inequality, the global inequality of AI applications, not just applications and computation though, but basically the access to AI, access to being part of this discussion, being part of this story, because I hadn't really thought of that. And I think that kind of betrays my sort of first world, white guy mentality, that I hadn't really considered the fact that everything we talk about is Silicon Valley, New York, London, Shanghai, it's not happening in the third world for the most part. And that's going to just accelerate this inequality of access. And as you mentioned too, Chris, we heard as well a lot about sort of ethics and bias and the fact that AI applications aren't necessarily reflecting the face of the world population.
Right, it's AI is like looking in the rear view mirror, right? So whatever happened in the past is really what you're going to see, and then it's also segmented, right? Depending on like where you look, like for example, like you mentioned, Stephen, New York City or other areas, right? So the real challenge is how do you bring a more multicultural and a more interesting view than collecting your data from a particular segment. It's not easy because you have a tendency to stick with what you know as opposed to kind of doing the right thing, because that is a lot more difficult.
Absolutely. And the reason I picked those three out too was because they all kind of interweave in interesting ways. To Stephen's point, right? The talk with Sofia was really, really eye-opening in that, she asked, where is this AI development happening? Where is the research happening, right? What universities are funding this? How do you even, get access to a lab to be able to try things out, right? I mean, a Jupyter Jupyter notebook, it isn't something that just everybody has access to, especially in the global South. But then that was kind of, played against the conversation we had a little bit later with Saiph Savage, where she was showing some really positive aspects of AI and the new kind of infrastructure that can be built around an individual for the gig economy, and how, if you take it from an empowering point and people do the right things around government and businesses and everything to support that we actually have some really interesting ways to work that weren't accessible to them before AI was on the scene, right? And then kind of wrapping that back around to Ayodele and the idea that, bias can be put in, which I think obviously comes from potentially, those same things of that global inequality, but can also be something that's, I think when people think about bias, they often think about, racial issues or class issues or gender issues. And it turns out that, you can have bias in almost any data, even if it's just about, French fries or milkshakes. And this can cause, really interesting effects in your quarterly results or in the way your life is lived.
Right. I think it's, AI, the best data you collect in AI is from people using the system, right? You can only hope that people might start with an AI model that might be slightly biased or biased completely. But as people start using it, that the bias is kind of being mathematically erased slightly every time people use it. I think also another observation is that a lot of the AI research in the past came from colleges and universities where the assumption was a lot more open-minded than AI models and AI frameworks being generated now by larger organizations, not to name them, but where some organizations are really kind of monetizing your data, and who knows what data they put in the models and how they integrate that into products, and who controls that, right? And that's another point, is data lineage, right? How do you when you have a model, how do you understand where data is coming from? Can you point at the different data sources where it's coming from? Because that also helps kind of detect the level of bias, right? Can you look at a model and say, is this model biased or not? Because we can talk about bias and not being biased, but how do you measure it? How do you figure that out? How do you go back and fix it? Can you fix it?
So let's actually take a little bit of a stroll through the season 2 and kind of try to pull out some of the themes that we got. And one of the things that occurs to me is we actually got one of the biggest themes of season 2 in the first episode of season 2, which is this whole theme that we kind of get back to again and again, which is AI as my co-pilot. So way back then, we talked to Steve Salinas about information security, AI-driven information security. And one of the themes of that episode wasn't information security at all. It was that AI is part of everything we do. The AI doesn't replace us, but it augments us. It augments our work, and it helps us to do new things. And that came back again and again and again throughout all of season 2. So we kept revisiting that theme of AI being my co-pilot. In episode, well, actually, we'll get to them, but yeah, there was a whole bunch of instances where we ended up talking about AI as my co-pilot. Another thing that came out right from the start was the idea of connecting, basically, how do you connect AI into the business? So that was, episode 2 with Monty Zwieben from Splice Machine, episode 3 with Per Nyberg from Strategy AI, episode 4 with Ken Groh of Weka. These were all episodes about basically connecting AI into enterprise applications, which again, I love the ethics and bias in AI episodes. I really do. And as you just heard, those were some of my favorites from the season. But the truth is that the majority of our listeners are spending their time trying to figure out, how are we going to implement this stuff? That's why we called it utilizing AI. Like, how do I implement this stuff? How do I use it? From my perspective, episodes like the Saiph Savage episode are a way for us to kind of put ideas into the minds of the people that are implementing these things, make sure they're thinking of these things. Whereas some of these others are ways of basically helping them to understand how things are running, right? Is that kind of how you see these, this sort of duality of episodes?
Absolutely. And again, I think like anything, I think there's a spectrum there, which again, right, is that I think that there are some parallels here. So let me walk through one of them, right? So I think you're right that this AI as your co-pilot has absolutely been a big theme throughout season 2, and just even outside of this podcast has been a big theme, I think, at least in my kind of coming to terms with AI and what it's actually going to mean in the long term. There's a lot of people out there who are worried that AI is going to take their jobs, and you know what, in specific instances that may be true, but I think in most cases across the board, AI is something that's going to augment human intelligence. But there's an interesting kind of flip side to that, I think, which came through in some of the episodes, like I think 16 with Foghorn, and there was I think Snorkel AI too in episode 23, and there's several others that I'm sure we can kind of pull out and pick out that are building things to make AI easier to use and more accessible to more people, which is almost the flip side, right? Because we're talking about AI making your job easier and making your life easier. But right now what's going on is that a lot of startups out there working to make AI period easier. And so, some of this is in the industrial space where we're saying, hey, there's these operational technologists who are, been making sure the machines are running in factories for a long time. And now we're adding AI in. How do we ensure that the people who actually have the domain knowledge to get this stuff done are able to use these systems? And I think that has corollaries with some of the other things we've talked about, which is, data validity and bias and some of these things that become bigger cultural issues. Those are issues in using AI to create enterprise applications. And so, again, there's a kind of a spectrum here, I think, that kind of goes back and forth.
Yeah, I look at it as the sessions being or educational or providing tools to build your AI models, right? The educational piece is where people, where you explain to people that AI is not voodoo, being the co-pilot, not trying to be the pilot by itself. And then the tools where, you mentioned Weka as an example, where this is a high performance file system. So if you're in the business of building AI models, then here are the tools you can use. So I think the combination of the both is really what makes, utilizing AI strong, in the sense that it not only explains how to get there, it also explains what you have to look for, and also what it doesn't is, right? It's sometimes people are looking for a definition, a positive definition, as opposed to, what is it not?
And I'm sure you're going to call this out, Stephen, but another kind of one of these dualities that I saw throughout season 2 was this level of kind of working in AI and working on AI. And what I mean is, there was episodes, for instance, like episode 15 with NVIDIA, or I'm kind of looking down the list here. I know we had a few others who kind of talked about, Liquid was another one in episode 17 that talked about kind of the infrastructure needed to build AI on top of. So we're kind of covering all these bases where we're talking about, okay, what is the physical and virtual infrastructure you need to put in place to be able to build AI applications? What are the other applications you need to enable AI applications, right? And then what are you going to do with these AI applications, and what does that mean for your business and for the world? And so we're kind of covering all the pieces there, it seems.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what we were really trying to do, was to cover all the bases. And, the whole time, for what it's worth, when we're kind of scheduling these things and figuring out what the topics are going to be and who the guests are going to be and so on, the thing that I'm always trying to keep in mind is that our sort of target audience member, and probably, you who's listening, are basically somebody who's out there trying to do this thing. And we're trying to help you to understand, kind of what it is, how it works, how to do it, what to keep in mind, et cetera. And not have it be just sort of a wonky discussion of AI. We want it to be really focused on the sort of the practical applications. So the next thing that I did want to bring up, though, is we had a absolute bang up episode this season. Can you guys guess what episode has by far our most listeners? Any ideas?
I mean, just because we haven't mentioned it yet, and it is kind of an exciting area of AI that people will think about a lot, I'm going to go with maybe the IBM and B plus episode 18 for the how to teach self-driving cars how to drive.
Self-driving cars. Frederic, what do you think?
It was the brain session, the BrainChip people, I believe.
Yeah, it was the BrainChip people.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, and that, in fact, that one had so many listeners that I actually reached out to BrainChip to find out what happened there. Like, what did you do? And well, the answer is that they've got a ton of fans. They've got like super fans. And if you guys are wondering, maybe people are listening or noticing this, that anytime you mention BrainChip, there's like a ton of attention. Well, the answer is they're not spamming. They just have these super fans who are absolutely like going nuts, and they kind of themselves don't even know what's going on with this. But it's kind of like anytime you talk about Tesla, people come out of the woodwork, or SpaceX or whatever, people come out of the woodwork and they have to like fan at you. Well, apparently it's like that with BrainChip. So that was kind of fun.
Yeah, I think that the concept of BrainChip is a lot easier to understand and see products you can build around it than a Tesla car, for example, right? The Tesla car is complex. It's a single block, and there's not much you can do otherwise with the technology from Tesla, except maybe the battery or the energy concept out of it. While with BrainChip, it's small enough that anybody can come up with an idea that is useful. And I think it's also the fact that they can grasp it, right? It's a much easier. There's an easy software development kit. It doesn't cost a lot of money, and so it's really easy to get started and to visualize it. I think that attracts also a lot of people. Is how do we get started in AI, right? I mean, those are questions we frequently get. It's not an easy answer, but if you have a product like BrainChip, it's much easier to point at and say, try it out.
Yeah, and just that idea of metaphor, right? Which, not to go down this rabbit hole on this episode necessarily, but one of the things I think that humans are still able to do and will be possibly forever is this idea of kind of framing and putting things in context. And one of the ways we do that is through metaphor. And I think BrainChip is just this great metaphor when you're essentially putting a brain on a chip. It's even right there in their name. And when you dig under the hood, that's literally what they're trying to do, right? It's putting neural networks into really low cost, low energy chips. You can put those out at the edge anywhere. And I think that, to your point, right, that's just a concept people can wrap their heads around it and kind of get it right away and have that light bulb moment, which definitely makes it fun to hear about.
Well, and also, I mean, frankly, chips are hot. We got a lot of listeners to our Intel episode, our NVIDIA episode. Chips are hot. People love listening to chips, chip talk, and people are interested in it. So another thing that comes up in my mind, we had a guest named by the name of Frederic Van Haren talking about transfer learning. That was fun. Frederic, that was what did you think of being a guest on the show?
Well, it's always different to be on the other side, but no, I liked it. I mean, it's always good to be able to talk a little bit about the technology you're working on, because it's something you vastly understand, and you have an opportunity to connect people and kind of explain what's happening in the middle layers of an AI model, right? So, and I think being able to try to explain that helped me also understand better what people are asking for, right? When you ask me questions, I have a better understanding of where you are and how you connect the dots than me having an understanding of transfer learning and trying to communicate that to you. I mean, it's like the worst thing you can do is put me in a room, talk to nobody, and say, write me a 5-page document on transfer learning. It probably will be horrible. But I do like the interaction. I think AI is something that is so misunderstood that the more we talk about it, the better it is. And trying to explain some concepts like transfer learning. What is transfer learning, right? Why is that important? Why are we doing that? Why can you as a startup use transfer learning and not having to spend as much energy and money to get something working? So I definitely like it. it's going with the punches. I guess as a guest, it's going with the punches, while as a host, you're kind of more in the driver's seat, which gives you a little bit more control. But I think the interesting piece is it took me out of my comfort zone, which I actually surprisingly like. Does that make me sadomasochistic? I don't know, but it does definitely help me understand better what's happening around me.
Yeah. It was, yeah, it's interesting to hear what it feels like to be on the other side of the table, as it were. And as for me, you may know that my background is in storage. So we mentioned Weka before. We also had, other companies on talking about storage and data management, which was, kind of a theme for me. So, we had Splunk, talking about data management. We also had, Scality, DDN, Concentric IO, and Titanium. And this was an interesting one. Actually we kept coming back to this topic too, homomorphic encryption and the application of homomorphic encryption to AI. So I don't want to talk out of school, but I suspect that here in season 3, we're going to be talking about homomorphic encryption more than once, because this is a topic I think that really matters to AI. And for those of you who kind of missed that episode or missed that topic, essentially the idea is, how can we do data processing on data that is encrypted, not making it easy to decrypt, but processing data while it is still encrypted. And that is mind-bending if you're a data guy like me, but it's true and it's a thing. And so that's what we talked about with Titanium. Chris, you were the co-host on that. Do you remember that as mind-bending as me?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the concept is 100% mind-bending. My mind is still bent. I'm still trying to wrap my head. I don't think I'm a good enough mathematician to ever truly understand it. But even just the concept, I'm coming to terms with it, and it's amazing. And that episode actually stands out in another way, which this is always hard to do, because everybody comes on the show is really, really intelligent, and it comes in from a place of power in this industry. But Artie was one of the smartest people I think I've ever talked to. And there was another episode that made me feel the same way, which was Dennis Apst from Grok. And that was a really deep conversation with a really intelligent human being that I thought was great. I mean, like I said, that happens every week, but those two really did stand out as far as just the depth of their knowledge and how apparent it was in those conversations.
How about you, Fred? Was there a certain person that stood out to you as wow, this is somebody that I really want to learn something from?
I wouldn't say a person. It's my background is technology, so I have a tendency to gravitate around interesting technology. But the BrainChip, if I had to say somebody, it's the person from the BrainChip presentation, because it's difficult to explain AI and bring that into a product that can be easily consumed. It's very difficult to explain that, and I know that from my own experience. So I appreciate anybody who has the ability to understand the technology and also has the ability to simply explain it, what it is, what can be done, and what others can do by that, right? I mean, and I agree with Chris. There's a lot of very bright people in AI, but I do appreciate somebody who understands it and can simply explain it.
Yeah, totally, absolutely. And I'm right there with you. And that kind of actually jogs a thing in my thoughts. So at the end of each episode in season 2, we did our 3 questions, where we asked the guests 3 surprising questions that they weren't prepared for, kind of open-ended things to have them give us an answer about the future of AI. And some of those questions were things like, when will we have a full self-driving car? When will we have a movie-style general purpose artificial intelligence? How small can AI get? How big can AI models get? And we got some really interesting answers there. I thought that I would actually take a moment, though, and revisit a few of those 3 questions, because I don't know if we need to retire them, but there were a few questions that we actually got universal answers to. So let me throw this to you guys, because you are the co-hosts and you heard the answers to this. what is the correct answer to this question? Okay, so here we go. And this is a surprise, just like our 3 questions, a surprise for you guys. Okay, number 1. Frederic, when will we see a full self-driving car that can drive anywhere, anytime?
That's I was going to say 4 or 5 years from now.
Can I buzz in?
Yeah, buzz in, Chris. What was the consensus
I think the consensus
answer?
answer is possibly never.
Right. If the assumption is that you're driving on a highway and suddenly an airplane needs to make a emergency landing, obviously that's something, you know, that the AI model wouldn't recognize, right? It's what kind of a bird is landing here, right in front of us. What do we do? Yeah, it may be never. I think my experience is if you ask people that are in a particular AI business about their own business, they will be very pessimistic, not optimistic. So if you ask something about some other AI vertical that they are not working on, they will be more positive. So I think my answer, the 4 or 5 years is really based on that. Is I'm not working on self-driving cars, but my experience that if you collect a lot of data, and people collect exponentially a lot more data today than they used to, that in 4 or 5 years, there's a high level percentage where it can accommodate everything, right? I mean, you could even debate, can everybody or can anybody deal with any situation in a car? And I would also debate that, that's also not 100%. So,
It's a strange side effect of these questions around self-driving cars and what are the things that get in the way, which I didn't realize. I was talking to one of my kids the other day, and they have thrust the idea of trolley problems into like common nomenclature. This was something that was just a philosophical kind of nonce. And now because of AI and conversations around this, I think a lot of people understand what a trolley problem is and what it means. Just as a side note, it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, it really is. And I think that's one of those things that I was going for with these when I wrote these questions originally, was to try to bring up some things that would be a little challenging, but also a little general purpose here. And I think that the takeaway from that question was essentially this thing that we've just been discussing, that who can deal with everything all the time? Nobody. In fact, I just read an article that Tesla actually has 2 different models. They have a highway model and a local model. And they've been trying to unify them. I'm not sure if that's true. Tesla, welcome on our show anytime you're ready. But that was, that they don't even have a general purpose self-driving model. They've got 2 models. I don't know. Another one that came up very frequently, which had a kind of a different answer, was how long will it take for conversational AI to pass the Turing test and fool the average person? Fred, your background is in speech. Do you remember the consensus answer for that one? So a verbal conversational AI.
I might have split it in 2 with text-to-speech and speech recognition. The text-to-speech is almost perfect today. So that's, that's basically starting out with text and pronouncing it correctly. That is very good technology and very advanced. Speech recognition is a little bit more difficult. I don't know what my answer was, but it's the problem is when you throw like an American English model at a non-native speaker, everything goes out of the window. But for a native speaker, I don't know, maybe I've said 3, 4, 5 years as well. Maybe that's also kind of an optimistic view, but I think, honestly, I think speech recognition today is pretty good. And you might get surprised that today they don't optimize speech recognition engines anymore. They optimize the NLP. So what happens is that the speech recognition might not be as high as you want, but they use NLP to fill in the gaps. And so I presume that with the NLP technology advancing, that 3, 4, 5 years from now, they will be a lot better with speech recognition with non-native speakers, because the key here is really non-native speakers.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's roughly the answers that we got. Was basically it's kind of not a problem really. It's the first question, this sort of okay, a Turing test in what kind of situation and with what kind of speakers and so on. If you're talking native English speakers, you can already do it.
Right.
If you're, and especially in a constrained environment or a constrained subject,
Right. And so in the early days of speech recognition, we tried to boil the ocean, meaning we're trying to make it work for everybody. Today, what's happening is that speech recognition is being personalized. So the systems recognize you as an individual and they optimize the AI model just for you.
Chris?
Well, I know that was the answer, and I agree that was definitely the consensus answer. Was kind of like, okay, it's here now, and there's obviously caveats, but I don't know about you all, but when I try to talk to my devices, I still have a lot of challenges. If there's a lot of kind of predefined things that I'm supposed to say, and if I say things other than that, or even if I say those things, they don't actually work for me. So just a caveat to that. I don't know. Scientifically, I think it works. In the real world, my experience has been different.
Yeah, that's true. I think if you ask most people how their phone personal digital assistant, and I'm not going to say the wake word, works, I think most of them would say it's crap. But it's really not. It's really amazingly good. And so we're going to continue the 3 questions for season 3, but we're going to throw a twist in here, and that is that we're going to have our guests. We're going to offer the opportunity for our guests and even our listeners to pose questions that we will use from our 3 questions library. So at the end of each episode, we're going to ask our guests off camera to record 1 or 2 questions, and then we're going to use their questions for a future guest. And if you, who's listening, want to be part of this, you can as well. Just send an email to host@utilizing-ai.com and let us know that you want to be part of this. And we would love to have you come on. You can meet Abby, you can record a couple of questions, and maybe we'll use your question on the show as well. So please do send a message for that. So before we wrap up here, I want to talk about season 3. I want to talk about what we're expecting from season 3. Now, obviously, some of these things that we've talked about are going to continue. The whole idea of AI as my co-pilot, the idea of ethics and bias and making sure that AI is universal and universally available, the idea of implementing and use cases and figuring out how to have AI work for us and also how to have AI work better. What other themes are you guys looking at here in season 3? I already mentioned homomorphic encryption is one of those things I think we're going to hear more about. I'll just tell you right now, I think we're going to hear a lot more about co-locating data and processing. So Samsung, for example, just talked about having processors in memory. Obviously, we talked with NGD and so on about processing on storage. We've talked about processing on network cards with NVIDIA. What do you guys think, Chris? What are the big topics we're going to hear?
Yeah, I agree with yours for sure. I think that idea of what the edge means for AI applications, which to your point is kind of bringing the data to the processing or bringing the processing to the data, is going to be a big one. I think even though we just kind of confirmed that maybe self-driving cars are further away than most people think, I think that's going to be a topic again, and especially not just self-driving cars, but maybe more along the lines of, okay, we're putting AI into enterprise applications. What does that mean for the world? And I'm not talking about the bias perspective this time. I'm talking more about how are we going to reinvent business models and reinvent products, right? Because to me, one of the most exciting things about self-driving cars is this idea of, potentially an ownerless car future where cars just kind of zip by and pick you up and take away. And what, where can we see that happen in other industries is what I'm curious about. And I think we're going to start seeing that in the next season.
Yeah, I would like to see more applications like BrainChip that are closer to the end user. I know we're looking at the enterprise, but if consumers start consuming AI, that means that the enterprises too have to get their act together. And it also means that a lot of the enterprises are making breakthroughs in AI, right? So although a year might not be a long time, but from an AI perspective, people make significant advances from an AI perspective. Me personally, I would also kind of like to see and hear from the financial world, and not necessarily financial people using AI, but how does the financial world, like VCs and startup investments, look at AI? What are they doing to help the market as opposed to invest money in another storage company or another server company. So that would be nice to see.
I mean, I'd be super interested to hear both sides of that, right? How AI has impacted the financial markets, and that's one of those areas of kind of what I like to call trickle down technology, right? Where the folks with the most money deploy these things first, and then you kind of see how it shakes out for the rest. And I think AI definitely, in a lot of ways, was born in some of the high frequency trading and quantitative shops and things like that, and seeing where that's come along. I don't know if we'll get anybody who wants to talk about that. And the other side is, how financiers are looking at AI and how do you price out an AI project. I mean, both those things would be super interesting. I don't know if we'll get folks to come out and talk about it publicly though.
Yeah. Another area I think that I hope to get is I've been following Hot Chips, the conference, and of course supercomputing is coming up. And at both of those conferences, we've often seen some of the latest and greatest stuff. I really would like to get some of these chip companies on here, Esperanto and Cerebras and so on. I mean, I know that we're going to have Intel on. I'm already talking to NVIDIA to come on, already talking to Marvell coming on in season 3. I'm really hoping that we'll see them. But I would love to get some of these other companies on as well. And sure, I'd love to get BrainChip back on, because remember, BrainChip promised that this thing was going to be real this fall. And so I really want to hear how the real thing works. Also, it's great to have BrainChip on because, of course, then we get 8 gazillion listeners and they subscribe and they get to hear the rest of the stuff we're talking about, which is always fun too. Another area I think that we really haven't covered at all, which is a widespread application of AI, is applying AI to multimedia. We're starting to see a lot of systems that use AI specifically to extrapolate audio and video data, whether it's as simple as sharpening photos or upscaling graphics, or as complicated as even deep fakes and stuff like that. I would love to see where that goes and what that means to the enterprise, to the practical applications of this. Because just like how AI has affected security by allowing us to collect and process more data, which is something we've talked about again and again, back to that Splunk episode, for example, that was a big topic there. I do think that AI processing more data and this whole concept, I mean, just take that concept of sharpening and just apply it to anything in the industry. That could be huge. And so it'll be interesting to see how AI can, for example, make fuzzy decisions sharper, which is something we hit on just in one of our last episodes of the season when we were talking about using AI in the corner office essentially to make decisions with Josh Epstein. That was an interesting thing. We can do things like that too, and so we'll see where it goes. Also, we're starting to see hints of massive models. So one of the 3 questions we started asking was, how big can AI get? And the answer is we ain't there yet. So I have a suspicion that in season 3, we're going to hear about something that makes GPT-3 look like a little use case, a little corner case. We're going to see a zillion parameter model or something. So we'll see what happens there. So thanks, guys, for being part of this. Thank you so much for your contributions week after week. And again, I'll just call out to the listeners. We would love to have you get involved. Please do find us. Utilizing-ai.com is our website. You can also find us on Twitter at utilizing_AI. As I said, if you want to be part of our 3 questions series, just send an email to host@utilizing-ai.com. We would love to hear from you. We'd love to have you be involved in that. Another thing I'd like to call out, shout out, is to our friends in the ML Ops community. A few episodes ago, we talked to Dimitrios Brinkman and David Aponte from ML Ops. And of course, they were part of the podcast from the very beginning in season 1 as well. And we're going to try to connect this into that community as well. So we're going to ask them to join us again, of course, but we're also going to try to get some more of the ML Ops people involved. And if you're interested, please do check out that community. Before we go, Chris and Frederic, where can we connect with you. What are you proud of other than utilizing AI in the coming year? Chris?
Yeah, I'm continuing to work a ton with GigaOM and doing some really cool practitioner-based industry analysis. And you can find everything about that and all the other consulting work and coaching and mentoring work I'm doing at chrisgrundeman.com or on Twitter at chrisgrundeman.
And for me, it's a lot of HPC and AI with a heavy focus nowadays on data management. Many more people or enterprises have petabytes of data compared to in the past, and getting to work with AI is becoming more and more of a, I have all that data, what do I do with it? Do I have the right data? Where do I get it from? What do I do with it from a research perspective? What do I do with it from an inference perspective, which is now the new thing? I can be found on Twitter as Frederic V. Haren, and my consultancy company is called Highfence. It's at highfence.com.
And as for me, you'll find me every week on the Gestalt IT Rundown. Every Wednesday, we do a tech news show where we cover things like the news from hot chips and so on. That's one of the things we just recently covered. Go to gestaltit.com to find that. And of course, you can find me on social media at sfoskett. Also, we are going to have another AI Field Day event. It's not for a little while, though. It's not one of our biggest topics, simply because we just don't have as many companies involved in that. But AI Field Day 3 will be April 20th through 22nd. So kind of season 3 will kind of lead us into AI Field Day 3, and I would love for you to check that out. Also, please do subscribe to the podcast. It's a free podcast everywhere. You can find it on your favorite podcast apps. Thankfully, Utilizing AI is now available basically everywhere. If you are on one of the apps that allows reviews, please do write a review or give us some stars. That does help. I know that everybody says that, but I'm not kidding. It really, really does help. And also, please drop us a line. Let us know that you're listening. There are thousands of people listening to this podcast every week, and it's just it's really helpful to us as hosts. I'll just speak for you guys too. We love hearing from people. We love having somebody say, I listened to that episode, I really enjoyed it, it really opened my eyes. That's something we've certainly heard in the past. So help our egos and reach out and tell us you're listening, because we always love to hear from that. So for now, for me and for our producer, Abby here at the Gestalt IT Studios, thank you for listening to Utilizing AI, Season 1, Season 2, and now Season 3. And for the first time, I'm going to say this for Season 3, we'll be back next week with another episode of Utilizing AI.